In the summer of 1914, millions of men put on pristine uniforms and marched into the European countryside. Everyone expected a short, glorious campaign, but those marching columns were walking into a 4-year slaughter. Europe was split into two deeply suspicious camps: the Triple Entente, uniting France, Britain, and Russia, and the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austro-Hungary, and Italy. Germany feared encirclement, while Austro-Hungary clung to its fracturing borders. A single shot ignited the powder keg. On June 28th, a Slav nationalist assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Within hours, ultimata were rejected, alliances were triggered, and the continent mobilized for war. The generals on both sides launched massive, pre-planned invasions to secure a quick win. Germany's Schlieffen Plan aimed to rapidly encircle Paris, while France launched Plan 17 directly into German territory. Both offensives collapsed under enormous losses. Instead of a rapid conquest, these failed initial maneuvers left millions of soldiers staring each other down across a battered landscape. The armies were deadlocked, and the war was just beginning. Facing the rapid-fire rate of modern machine guns and explosive artillery shells, standing in an open field was suicide. To survive the technology of 1914, soldiers on both sides were forced to dig into the earth. Looking at this topographical map, you can see how this defensive tactic metastasized. As both armies tried to outflank each other to the north, they carved a continuous 350-mile scar of trenches, stretching from the English Channel coast straight down to the Swiss border. The line was effectively frozen. Any attempt to advance sent men directly into a wall of lead, but remaining in place only exposed them to a slow, grinding death by bombardment. Desperate to regain momentum, generals turned away from traditional cavalry charges and looked to the laboratories and factories of the industrial age. They needed entirely new weapons capable of breaching fortified enemy lines. The result was a terrifying chemical arms race. Armies unleashed massive clouds of lethal chlorine and mustard gas, forcing troops to fight in unbreathable environments and transforming the battlefield into an alien landscape. British engineers built mechanical beasts designed to crush barbed wire and cross no man's land under heavy fire. They called them tanks. But these early metal behemoths were slow, crude, and highly prone to breaking down in the mud. The deadlock even pushed the conflict up into the sky. Germany deployed giant zeppelins to bomb civilian ports in Britain, while early scout planes were quickly fitted with machine guns to shoot down enemy reconnaissance. Yet for every terrifying technological leap, the defense adapted. Gas masks were issued, anti-tank tactics were developed, and the trenches held firm. The new industrial horrors made the war bloodier, but the line remained as stubborn as ever. If the armies couldn't punch a hole straight through the trench lines in Europe, commanders reasoned they had to go around them. The struggle to outflank the enemy rapidly expanded the conflict into a global war. The Allies tried to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the fight by launching a massive amphibious invasion at Gallipoli. Instead of a quick victory, they hit fierce Turkish resistance on the beaches, resulting in yet another bloody, entrenched stalemate. Combat spilled across continents. British forces clashed with German troops in the jungles of East Africa, while officers like T.E. Lawrence advised Arab rebels in a fierce guerrilla war against Turkish rule deep in the Middle Eastern deserts. Opening these vast new fronts didn't move the needle on the Western Front. It simply exported the same exhaustion and slaughter to the frozen mountains of Italy, the sands of the Middle East, and the remote colonies of Africa. Out of technological solutions and unable to maneuver around the enemy, commanders pivoted to the darkest logic of the war. They stopped trying to take territory and decided to simply bleed the opposing side dry. It was the strategy of pure attrition. This macabre mathematics reached its peak at Verdun. The German High Command explicitly designed the offensive as a mincing machine, intending to draw in the French army and slaughter so many men that France would have no choice but to surrender. The math of attrition extended to the home front. Britain used its massive navy to impose a strict blockade on Germany, cutting off vital imports and intentionally starving the civilian population to collapse the German economy. Germany retaliated with a desperate countermeasure. They ordered their submarines to sink Allied merchant ships without warning. It was a brutal tactic that destroyed food supplies, but ran the risk of dragging neutral nations, like the United States, into the war. The war had evolved into a raw test of national endurance. Whoever finally managed to break the stalemate would only do so when the enemy's society entirely collapsed under the weight of mass death and starvation. By 1917, the internal pressure of total war finally fractured empires from the inside out. Mutinies paralyzed the French army, while bread shortages and massive casualties sparked a full-scale revolution in Russia, knocking a major Allied power out of the fight. Free to move 500,000 troops from the east, Germany launched a massive, last-ditch spring offensive in 1918. Their commanders knew they had to win the war immediately, before the vast manpower and industrial might of the newly entered United States could arrive in force. But the German advance finally ran out of steam just as thousands of fresh American divisions entered the line. Supported by tanks and aircraft, the combined Allied armies launched the 100 Days Offensive, finally shattering the German trench lines. Starving, exhausted, and facing rebellion at home, the Central Powers disintegrated. On November 11, 1918, Germany signed an armistice, and the guns across Europe finally fell silent. The stalemate didn't break because of a brilliant new strategy. The fighting finally stopped because the participants had simply run out of blood, food, and steel to feed the machine. The toll was apocalyptic. 9.5 million soldiers and 7 million civilians were dead. An entire generation of young men had been wiped out, leaving a devastated continent in their wake. At the Palace of Versailles, the victors imposed harsh terms on the defeated German Republic. They restricted its military, demanded massive financial reparations, and forced Germany to accept total responsibility for the conflict. This map shows the absolute political devastation. 4 massive, centuries-old empires, the Russian, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and German, were permanently erased from the earth, replaced by a patchwork of fragile new states. The drive to end the stalemate introduced the world to chemical weapons and industrial slaughter, while simultaneously dismantling the global order. It left behind deep-seated resentments, ensuring the peace was only a prelude to the next great conflict.